We do live in propitious times. Here we are a day after the Super Tuesday. It's indeed been a fascinating few months for those of us who are condemned to follow politics for a living. We've had our own remarkable election last fall and the even more remarkable spectacle that's now unfolding to the south, if spectacle even adequately describes it. At a most basic level, each is a test of how much and how far the dynastic principle can be applied to politics. The Republicans have just finished disposing of the son and brother of a former president, Jeb Bush. The Democrats are willing themselves to decide whether they're going to elect the wife of a former president, Hillary Clinton. And here in Canada, we elected the Dauphin, the son of Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau. It was, by all accounts, an unusual election, unusual for its length, at least by our standards, 11 weeks, or in American campaign terms, lunch. It was unusual for its volatility. Fun fact, this was the first election that I've ever seen, certainly, in which all three parties were at one time first, second, and third in the polls. And it was unusual for the results. The Liberals mounting the greatest comeback in Canadian political history, going from 19% of the vote and 34 seats in 2011 to 39% of the vote and a majority this time out. And the Tories, while they like to console themselves that it could have been worse, it could have been a lot better. They became only the fifth majority government in the last century to be driven from office, and with probably the least cause beyond their own misdeeds. It was indeed two elections, really. The first was whether to keep the Tories in power. It was more or less over before it started. They had really a 35% ceiling in the polls, if you looked at it. 30% of people who would vote for them as their first choice, and only about 5% that would mark them as their second choice. But if you really want to see how polarized our politics had become, you had to look at when you asked Tory voters who their second choice was. 50% of them wouldn't name a second choice. They either wanted to have a conservative government or they didn't want to have a government at all. That is polarization. The second election was really who would replace them. And of course, that was a famous Liberal victory. There have been all sorts of explanations offered, of course, in terms of policy and strategy. The New Democrats had wrongly thought that the Liberals would be knocked out of it early, and then they'd be in a two-party race with the Conservatives, and we would see that they were a government waiting, sober-sided, and respectable, etc. And of course, they allowed themselves thereby to be outflanked by the Liberals as the party of change, and the turning point of that, of course, being the balanced budget pledge that Tom Mulcair foolishly issued when he thought he was about to close the deal. The Tories, for their part, ran without a platform, as far as I could tell. It was essentially amounted to more of the same, you curs, or as my mother used to say at dinner, you'll eat it and you'll like it. They played wedge politics to the last, most infamously, of course, with the barbaric practices snitch line, or as I call it, peak niqab. They'd spent a week of mounting hysteria over, the practice of maybe a half dozen women of taking the oath of citizenship while they're wearing the niqab. And I think in the end they wound up going far too far, alienating people who might have been prepared to give them a look, clouding what they hoped to be an economic message, and indeed reminding those voters who were previously bound and determined to vote them just exactly why they hated them. But for all the talk about policy and strategy, I really do think the election came down to a question of leadership. And in the end, this was very much a referendum on Justin Trudeau. The Tories had invested a great deal in the proposition that he, quote, just wasn't ready. The problem with that as a slogan was it was testable. And indeed, that was very much what that long election campaign was about. It was deciding whether or not he was indeed ready or not. The best single thing I heard said about that election was my erstwhile colleague Bruce Anderson from the panel, who on election night said, I don't think the Liberals would have won if they hadn't started in third. The way I look at this is people tend to interpret events through stories. Certainly we in the media business do, but I think it's a human nature. We like to fit things into a narrative. And a large section of Canadians, I'm convinced, were looking at Trudeau because of who he was, the son of Pierre Trudeau, through the prism of the story of Prince Hal, the feckless youth who is tested by adversity and grows up to be king. Now, they weren't just going to give him the crown on a platter, but he had to earn it. I think the biggest single challenge for them, however, is going to be keeping expectations in check. They've promised so much to so many. There were more than 300 promises in that platform. and they're popular. And who wants to give up being popular, especially if you're the cool kids? So this is where stuff is about to get real, because on the one hand, we've got the Energy East pipeline that is very much the last hope for Alberta's oil, and therefore is very important to Alberta. On the other hand, we've got the Bombardier Schlamazel, where they seem determined to give them another $1 billion on top of the billions that they've already collected. You have to know about Bombardier. It's said that Bombardier is in the aerospace sector, but actually it's in the subsidy business. It's just with every $100 million they throw in a free plane. But as I say, we're looking at potentially a very nasty situation erupting if they don't do anything on the Energy East and they do give them $1 billion to one family in Quebec. It is going to get very ugly in a hurry. So maybe that's when the honeymoon ends. But meanwhile, there's the US election to cheer us all up. The front runners in the two parties do present a stark choice, don't they? A real study in contrast. On the one hand, you've got in Hillary Clinton, a 68-year-old millionaire from New York. On the other hand, you've got Donald Trump, a 69-year-old billionaire from New York. Of course, it's always possible we could see Michael Bloomberg enter the race, giving Americans the option of a 74-year-old billionaire from New York. And maybe Bernie Sanders can still pull it out for the Democrats, in which case you'd have a 75-year-old from New York who's obsessed with billionaires. On the Republican side, this was, of course, supposed to be the year of the governor in their race. They had a bunch of capable conservative governors like Scott Walker and Chris Christie and John Kasich and Jeb Bush, and well, we saw what happened to all of them. Instead, they were blindsided by this phenomenon of Donald Trump. Now, again, the temptation, I think, is to overanalyze this, and there's been plenty of that. That's what we do in my business. People tend to explain it in terms that accord with their own prior beliefs. So if, for example, you think immigration needs to be tightened, well, then you say it's because those out-of-touch Republican elites don't understand that people want immigration tightened. Or if you think the Republicans have to come to terms with Obamacare and stop fighting it, well, then you're going to say, well, it's because they keep resisting the allure of Obamacare. Myself, I think it is not as complicated as that. I think it comes down to leadership again, and the unique combination that Trump represents of immense personal resources and utter personal shamelessness. It defies rational expectation otherwise. I mean, just look at the results of these primaries. He insulted the Pope and carried the Catholic vote. He insulted George W. Bush and said the Iraq War was a lie, and he carried the veteran vote. He's a thrice-married pro-abortion casino owner who once talked about how he'd like to date his own daughter, and he won the evangelical vote. He boasts of having bought and paid for politicians and attracts the support of those who think the system's rigged. He carries on like a spoiled adolescent. He boasts nonstop. He insults virtually everyone. You can go to find a website where they list all of the people he's called a loser. He shows no significant understanding of any major issue. He has no platform beyond elect me and I'll make it right. He habitually gets facts wrong or makes them up. For example, he declared that the real unemployment rate in the United States was not the 5% official rate. It was 28, 29, maybe 35, and I heard a guy say 42. That's a quote. He lies and lies and lies and lies about his lies, and the biggest reason the supporters say that they're with him, because he tells it like it is. He doesn't tell it like it is. He tells it like he just made it up. This is impervious to any reasoned analysis. The best single statement I've heard about the source of Donald Trump's appeal is the lady in the crowd watching him speak who told a reporter that she supported him because, quote, he's going to make America great again. It says so on his hat. This is the essence of populism as it's properly understood. It is not about empowering the people, it's about empowering the strong men seeking to lead them. It doesn't teach people you're strong and you can make decisions on your own. It says, trust me, give me all the power, I will protect you. And if it sounds familiar, it sure is. It's Rob Ford all over again, only as the potential leader of the free world, which in fact boggles the mind. If there's one thing that can save the Republicans, it's the Democrats. As unpopular and off-putting as Trump is, so in her own way is Hillary Clinton, after last night the prohibitive favorite to win the Democratic nomination. a candidate with a list of scandals and assorted political baggage trailing after her, and all the charm of a paper shredder. Indeed, she may well be indicted before she's nominated. But as she's shown in her battle with Bernie Sanders, the Democrats' own insurgent candidate, she is a cunning and adaptable political animal, steadily co-opting the parts of his message that seem to be resonating with voters, morphing like the Terminator into a battle-hardened political machine. Nevertheless, it does feel like something is coming to an end here. Perhaps it will be the Republican Party, perhaps it's the two-party system. I only hope it isn't the end of American democracy. Thank you very much.